You cannot think your way into peace, the Buddhist path to a quiet mind. Something happened today. Maybe it was small. A look from someone, a mistake at work, a conversation that ended wrong. Or maybe it was nothing new at all. Just the same old weight you have been carrying for weeks, months, years. And now the day is over. The body is tired, but the mind is wide awake. It goes back to what happened. It replays the scene. It rewrites what you should have said. Then it jumps forward. What will happen tomorrow? What will they think? What if it gets worse? You tell yourself, stop. Just stop thinking. But that does not work. Because telling yourself to stop thinking is also a thought. And now you are thinking about thinking. I know this feeling well. For a long time, I believed that the way out of suffering was to think more carefully. If I could just find the right explanation, the right understanding, the weight would lift. And sometimes it did, for a moment. But then a new question would appear, and the whole cycle would start again. What I slowly began to see, and what the Buddha taught over 2,500 years ago, is that thought is a useful tool, but a terrible master. It can help you plan, learn, and solve real problems. But when you ask it to remove all fear, all doubt, all pain from your life, it cannot do that. And the attempt itself becomes a new kind of suffering. So I do not want to talk about how to think better. I want to talk about how to see what thought actually is, what it can and cannot do, and what happens when you stop asking it to save you. Let me start with something that might sound strange. The mind that will not stop is not broken. It is trying to help. From the time you were a child, thinking solved problems. You learned to plan ahead, to avoid mistakes, to read people's faces for signs of danger or approval. When something went wrong, the mind stepped in. What happened? Why? How do I make sure it does not happen again? This is a good system. For practical things. The roof is leaking. Think about how to fix it. You have a difficult conversation tomorrow. Some planning helps. But there is another kind of thinking that works very differently. And I think most of us know it, even if we have never named it. Something bothers you. The mind picks it up. It turns it over. It asks, why did this happen? And it finds an answer. But the answer does not bring peace. So the mind asks again, from a different angle. Then again, and again. Each time, it promises that the next round will finally settle things. But it never does. This is not problem solving. This is the mind circling a feeling it does not know how to sit with. And the hardest part is that it looks so much like problem solving from the inside. You feel like you are getting somewhere. You feel like the next round of thinking will finally bring the answer. That is what keeps the loop running. The Buddha described something very close to this. In a teaching called the Vibhanga Sutta, the analysis of dependent arising, he mapped out 12 links in a chain that describes how suffering builds across an entire life. The full teaching is vast and goes far beyond repetitive thinking. But within it, there is a section that describes what happens inside us every day. When our senses make contact with something, a sight, a sound, a memory, a thought, a feeling arises. Not an emotion, not a story, just a basic tone. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The Pali word is Vedana. It is simpler than what we usually call feeling in English. It is the raw sense of this is comfortable or this is uncomfortable that appears before any thinking begins. And then the mind reaches. It wants the unpleasant feeling to stop. It wants the pleasant feeling to stay. The Buddha called this tanha, craving, not in some dramatic sense, but in the most ordinary way. The mind wanting this moment to be different from what it is. Then the mind grabs onto something. The Buddha described 4 kinds of this grasping. Grasping at pleasure, at views and opinions, at rules and methods, and at a theory of self. This is who I am. This is what it means about me. The mind holds that story, returns to it, adds to it, rehearses conversations that have not happened. And now you are no longer sitting with a feeling. You are living inside a story about the feeling. The story feels like understanding, but underneath it, the original discomfort has not moved. I spent years doing exactly this, building stories, mistaking them for solutions. What helped me was not trying to stop thinking. It was asking a simpler question. What is my mind reaching for right now? And can thinking actually give it to me? Usually, the answer was no. The mind was reaching for certainty, that things would be okay, that someone would not leave, that I was not making a terrible mistake. Thought cannot deliver those things, but the mind keeps trying, because trying feels better than sitting still with not knowing. When you see this, really see it, not just as an idea, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself for overthinking. You start seeing it as a process that runs on conditions. And a process with conditions is something you can work with. Here is something the mind does so fast that most people never catch it. A thought appears, and in the same moment, it becomes the truth. Not, I am having the thought that I am failing. Just, I am failing. The thought shows up without any warning label. It speaks as if it were reporting the news. And because a feeling comes with it, tightness in the chest, heat in the face, the thought seems proven. The feeling is real, so the thought must be real too. But there is a big difference between a feeling being real and a thought being true. You made a mistake. That happened. It is a fact. Shame appeared. That is a feeling, and it is real. But then the mind adds, I always ruin everything. That is not a fact. That is an interpretation. And if you do not see the difference, the interpretation swallows the whole experience. It stops being something you thought and starts being something you are. The Buddha taught a practice that speaks directly to this. In the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the most important teachings on meditation in the entire canon, he gave a specific instruction for observing the mind. The text says it plainly. When greed is present in the mind, a practitioner simply knows, there is greed in my mind. When greed is absent, they know that too. When there is hatred, they know hatred is present. When the mind is restless, they know it is restless. That is it. Just know. It sounds too simple to do anything. But think about what we normally do instead. When anxiety shows up, most of us either fight it, I should not feel this way, and now we have anxiety plus shame about the anxiety. Or we become it. I am an anxious person. This is just who I am. And a passing storm becomes a permanent identity. The Buddha is pointing to a third option. Not fighting, not becoming, just seeing. Anxiety is here. You are not pushing it away. You are not turning it into who you are. You are simply making it visible. When a thought runs the show without being seen, it controls everything. Your words, your actions, your mood. But the moment you see it as a thought, it loses some of its power. Because now there is space. There is the thought, and there is the part of you that noticed the thought. Those are not the same thing. The Buddha examined what we call self as 5 processes that are always changing: body, feelings, perception, mental patterns, and consciousness. In the 𝐂𝐡𝐚𝐧𝐬𝐞 Sutta, he pointed out that none of these can be self, because none of them are under our complete control. If feelings were truly yours, you could choose to feel only pleasure. But you cannot. These are processes that arise through conditions and change when conditions change. What feels like the absolute truth about you right now, I am a failure, I will always be alone, may feel completely different tomorrow morning. Not because you were lying to yourself, but because thoughts and feelings are, by nature, always changing. And something that is always changing does not deserve to be treated as a life sentence. A small thing I have found helpful. When a thought feels heavy, try saying quietly to yourself, "The mind is producing the thought that," and then state the thought. "The mind is producing the thought that I will never get through this." You are saying the same words, but the frame has shifted. The thought is no longer the truth about your life. It is something your mind is doing right now under these conditions. And from that small distance, you can begin to ask, is this actually true? Do I need to follow this? If a thought is not automatically a fact, what do we do with it? Not all thoughts are the same. Some thoughts carry real information. I need to apologize to her. That might be true and important. I should see a doctor about this. That might save your life. Thought becomes a problem not when it exists, but when it keeps running after its job is done. The Buddha spoke about this from his own experience. In the Devadavittaka Sutta, the teaching on two kinds of thought, he described what he did before his awakening. He watched his own mind and divided his thoughts into two groups, not by whether they felt pleasant or unpleasant, but by where they led. One group was rooted in sensual craving, ill will, and cruelty. The other was rooted in letting go, goodwill, and harmlessness. He examined each thought by asking, does this lead to hurting myself? Does it lead to hurting others? Does it block wisdom? Does it move me toward freedom or away from it? When he reflected on the harmful consequences of a thought, it went away on its own. Not through force, not through willpower, through understanding. As the commentary to this teaching notes, thoughts are not overcome by fighting them, but by seeing clearly what they lead to. A revenge fantasy might feel satisfying, but where does it take you? Deeper into anger. A painful recognition that you hurt someone might feel terrible, but where does it lead? Toward repair. The feeling is not the guide, the direction is. And the Buddha made another observation that I find deeply honest. He said that even his wholesome thoughts, even the ones rooted in goodwill and harmlessness, became a problem when he held on to them too long. When he kept thinking and examining, even along the right lines, his body grew tired. When the body was tired, the mind became stressed. And when the mind was stressed, it moved far from stillness. So he let the thinking settle and entered a state of deep concentration that goes beyond the activity of thinking entirely. Even right thinking has a limit. The goal is not to replace bad thoughts with good thoughts and think the good ones forever. There comes a point where what you need is not better thinking. It is the willingness to put thinking down. He also taught something worth hearing. Whatever a person frequently thinks about and turns over in the mind, that becomes the direction of the mind. If you keep thinking about resentment, the mind bends toward resentment. If you practice thoughts of goodwill, the mind inclines toward goodwill. Repetition shapes the mind, not just in meditation, but in everything. For everyday life, one question cuts through a lot of noise. Is this thought leading toward something I can actually do? If yes, name the action and do it at the right time. Let the rehearsal stop. If no, if the mind is circling something you cannot control, then the thought is not helping. It is the mind reaching for certainty that thought cannot provide. So what do you do when a thought keeps coming back, even after you have seen where it leads? In a separate teaching, the Vitakkasanthana Sutta, the Buddha laid out 5 methods for working with thoughts that keep returning and leading toward harm. They are structured as a progression. You start with the gentlest and only move to the next if the first one fails. First, redirect your attention, like replacing a loose peg with a better fitting one. If that does not work, look honestly at the consequences of the thought. The Buddha compared this to a young person who discovers something disgusting hung around their neck. Seeing it clearly creates a natural desire to let it go. Third, simply stop feeding the thought with attention, like closing your eyes when something unpleasant enters your vision. Fourth, slow down the process itself, like a person walking quickly who asks, "Why am I rushing?" and gradually slows to a walk, then a stand, then a seat. And only as a last resort, apply firm mental discipline. The Buddha's own metaphor here is a strong person physically restraining a weaker one. But I want to be honest. There have been times when none of these methods were enough, when the body was too exhausted, or the pain too deep for me to work with alone. In those times, what I needed was not more practice but more support. Rest, honest conversation, and sometimes professional help. The Buddha never taught that you must handle everything alone. He taught you to see clearly what is happening and respond wisely. Sometimes wisdom looks like sitting still. Sometimes it looks like asking for help. This might be the most important thing I can share with you, because there is a misunderstanding about peace that many of us carry without knowing it. The misunderstanding is this: peace is something you create in the moment you need it. You sit down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and peace should appear. If it does not, you are doing something wrong. But the Buddha describes something very different. In a teaching called the 𝐂𝐻𝐻𝐿 Sutta, What's the Goal?, the Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha a simple question. What is the point of living ethically? What does it actually lead to? And the Buddha answered in a way that reveals the entire architecture of inner peace, not as a technique, but as a natural chain of cause and effect. He said, "The goal of skillful ethics is freedom from regret. When you live honestly, when your actions match what you know is right, the mind does not carry the weight of things you wish you had not done. From that freedom from regret, a natural gladness arises. Not forced joy, just the lightness that comes from having nothing to hide. From gladness, something deeper appears, piti, a kind of wholesome energy. From that, tranquility settles in. From tranquility, a deep sense of well-being. From well-being, the mind naturally becomes concentrated and still. And from that deep stillness, something the Buddha called truly knowing and seeing becomes possible. Yatha bhutanyanadasana, seeing things as they actually are. But the chain does not stop there. From truly seeing, nibbida arises, disenchantment. Not depression, not bitterness, more like waking up from a dream you did not know you were in. From that comes viraga, dispassion, a cooling of the fire that drove all the reaching and grasping. And from dispassion comes the knowledge and vision of complete freedom. The Buddha concluded this teaching. Skillful ethics progressively lead up to the highest. Notice where it all starts. Not with a meditation app, not with the right breathing pattern. It starts with how you live. I had to learn this the hard way. There was a time when I was meditating regularly, but my mind would not settle. I kept looking for better methods, more advanced practices. None of them worked. Not for long. What I eventually had to face was simpler. There were things in my life I was avoiding, conversations I needed to have, truths I was not admitting to myself. The mind was not restless because my meditation was bad. The mind was restless because it was carrying things I had not dealt with. When I started dealing with them, slowly, imperfectly, often badly at first, the mind began to quiet down. Not because I forced it, not because I found a better technique, because the weight underneath had gotten lighter. The chain the Buddha described was not a theory. It was exactly what happened. This does not mean you need to become a perfect person before you can feel any peace. The Buddha never taught perfection. But what you do during the day, how you speak, how you treat people, whether you are honest, is not separate from what happens when you close your eyes at night. And there is one more thing worth sitting with. Even when peace comes, it comes as something that arose because of conditions. It is real. It is valuable. But it is not permanent. If you try to hold on to it, I felt so peaceful yesterday, why not now? You have turned peace itself into another thing to grasp. And grasping is the very movement that creates suffering. The deeper direction is not to chase a particular feeling. It is to loosen the habit of holding on so tightly, to pleasant experiences, to painful ones, to the stories the mind tells about both. You can feel a taste of this right now. Just notice that you are breathing. Do not try to change it. Notice if there is tension somewhere, in the shoulders, the jaw, the hands. You do not have to fix it. For just one breath, let everything be as it is. The mind might keep talking. That is fine. You are not trying to stop it. You are just noticing that underneath the talking, there is a simple awareness. Something that was there before the thoughts started, and will be there after they pass. The Buddha did not teach that peace comes from finding the one perfect thought that silences all other thoughts. He taught something much simpler and much more kind. Peace is not produced by thinking. Peace is what remains when the grasping quiets down. Not every question needs an answer. Some just need to be put down.